Welcome everyone. Please feel free to keep eating. Enjoy your lunch. It looks like a good Middle Eastern cuisine with some shawarma and some other good stuff, so enjoy. We are continuing the second part of our two-class series here, Stories of the Talmud. And as we mentioned last week, for those who weren't here, the Talmud is comprised of 80% technical Jewish law. Monetary law, damages. I was just studying a page this morning in the Talmud that dealt with somebody who is transporting a barrel of liquid through the street. He drops the barrel, he trips, and he drops the barrel, and now somebody slips on that liquid. Perhaps it was a barrel of oil, somebody slips. Is he liable for damages for the person who now slipped on the liquid? He didn't even have time to clean it up. It wasn't that we say, you should have cleaned it up. It happened almost instantaneously. As soon as he tripped, the person slipped on the liquid. Is he liable or not? That is a very standard Talmudic case. Technical law, are you obligated to pay or not? What we will focus on today is the other 20% of the Talmud, which is stories, lessons, parables, metaphors, where there are important life lessons to be learned. There are important fundamental Jewish beliefs and ideas that we are going to explore from these stories. And we're going to take off where we kind of left off from last week. We were discussing a more obscure, that was the third category that we discussed. The first category is a very simple lesson. We discussed the one of speak little and do a lot. We discussed there's a second category where there are stories where the lesson is very obvious and simple, is straightforward. And then there's a third kind of story which seems bizarre, obscure, very difficult to comprehend or understand what that lesson is. And we are in the middle of that. So let us pick up where we left off. We'll quickly recap. The story here is on page 1 of your source sheets. Am I speaking loud enough? Is everyone able to hear me? Excellent. So, said Rabbi Bar Chana, the name of a Talmudic sage, he says, I saw Horman, the son of Lilith. Now, this is not clear who that's referring to. Running along the battlements of Mechuzah. The battlements are the cities, the city wall, and Mechuzah was a city in ancient Babylonia, which was a center of commerce, of business, as well as education. And this Horman is running across the walls of the city, and down below, alongside that wall, a cavalryman below, riding on an animal, but could not keep up with Horman, who was sprinting across the wall on top. And the story continues. Once there were 2 mules that were saddled for this Horman, and he stood on the 2 sides of the river Donag. There was a mule on either side of the river. Horman was straddling the 2 mules that were on the 2 sides of the river. And he jumped from one mule to the other while holding 2 cups of wine in his hands, 1 cup in each hand, pouring from one to the other without a drop of wine falling to the earth below. Incredible juggling act by Horman, jumping from mule to mule, pouring wine, not spilling a bit. And that was the day when things rise to the heavens and descend to the depths, a quote from Psalms. Finally, the king's men heard of Horman's doings and put him to death. That is the story. What does that mean? What is going on? And that's what we're going to explore. Just to recap quickly from last week, there was a Persian philosophy which was bothered by the following dilemma, which is that man seems to be a contradiction. There's that we're conflicted. We have within us a more animalistic, lustful drive, where we are perhaps selfish, lustful, we desire things. And at the same time, man seems to be of a spiritual nature. We're giving, we're beneficent, we're magnanimous, we're altruistic and charitable, where we like to help others. We're good. Times we're good, times we're bad. How do we reconcile the contradiction of man? And the Persian philosophy was that man was created by 2 gods. There was the god called Horman, who is the god of earth, darkness, and evil. And he created the lower half of man, which reflects our desires and our lusts from the stomach down. And then there is Ahurmez, who is the god of the heavens, light and good. And he created the upper half of man, which is our thought process, the ability of speech, the more almost angelic attributes of man. That was the Persian approach. However, the Jewish idea is that no, there are no two gods. We believe in just one God who created man. He created different components of man. He created the more base animalistic part of man, and he created the more spiritual part of man. And the reason why this one God that we believe in created two parts was because the goal in life is for us to come close to God, to choose to do the right thing. But if that would be simple and easy, if there would be no exertion needed to get to the top of the mountain, if a mere cable car brings you to that very peak, the summit of the mountain, then the view, the vista from on top is not as enjoyed. It doesn't mean as much. But when there are hurdles or struggles and difficulty and challenges that we need to overcome to reach the top of that mountain, that's when we appreciate being at that summit, at that height. And hence, there are no two gods. There are two components within man, and life's struggle is for the good to vanquish and overcome the darker side of man. And that's what we discussed last week, was the debate between the Talmudic sage Maimar and the Persian philosopher. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take apart this story piece by piece, explaining how each and every detail alludes, it hints to a very deep Jewish belief that we have. And if we can continue where we left off, which is on page 2. Again, well, just to recap what we had. This Horman who is running across the wall of the city, he represents the true hedonist, the one who only tries to indulge in sensual pleasures, worldly, earthly pleasures. And he's running across, that is Horman. And he's said to be the son of Lilith. Lilith, we know, was a female demon who represents the temptation of men for the darker pleasures of life. And he's said to be the son of Lilith because whenever somebody is completely molded or guided by a belief or an idea, so that shapes and forms who they are. If I believe a certain thing, I'll live my life by that principle. That shapes who I am. And the same way I'm a son of my mother, she is responsible for creating me as to who I am. A belief by which I live my life also shapes and forms me. That's what it means that Horman was the son of Lilith. His entire life, his outlook about life was all based on this female demon named Lilith. I was talking to a fine gentleman after the class yesterday. He told me he really doesn't get along well with his sister. There's a family feud, and she one time was being called up to the Torah, and she needed to know what her Jewish name was. She didn't know. And he told her that your name is Lilith Bas Satan. That's what...
That's not a deal.
Anyway. Okay. That brings us now to page 2, and we are going to explore what the significance of the wall is. He's running across this wall. What does a wall represent? So again, page 2, letter C. A city wall protects it from dangers without. When you have a wall in ancient times, cities had a wall. If you've been to the old city of Jerusalem, it's surrounded by a wall. The inhabitants live within the city, and the wall protects it from invaders, from marauders that might come and try to harm people living in the city. As a matter of fact, in the Torah portion this week, it's the episode of the spies, when the Jews are in the desert and they are about to enter into the land of Israel, and they are sending spies to see the land and see perhaps what's the best approach, how to conquer the city. And Moses says, take notice if the people live in walled cities or if they live out in open cities that are not surrounded by a wall. And the commentators explain that when people live within a walled city, it means that they are weaker. They don't rely on their own strength. They need the protection of the walls in order to feel comfortable and safe. Were they to be mighty warriors, strong, relying on their own strength, they don't need walls to protect them. So the function of a wall is to protect the inhabitants of the city. But it doesn't just protect from the outside, it also defines the space within, which means, I'll give you an example. This coming September, Partners in Torah is running a trip, a mission to Israel for dads. We call it our destination for dads. And we'll be bringing about 50 people to Israel, many of whom have never been there before. And the idea is to try to strengthen their Jewish identity with the hope that if they come back as prouder Jews, it's hard to be proud about that which you know little of. And if they get more educated about Judaism, about Israel, and they have a sense of pride in our homeland and in their traditions, then hopefully they'll inspire their children to marry Jewish and become more involved in the Jewish community. And that's the goal of the trip. So we are going to have a pre-trip. I want everyone to have a chance to meet each other, the bonding. It's a lot about the bonding, about the formation of relationships. And I want them to have a chance to meet each other before the trip. So the Sunday before we take off to the Holy Land, we're going to have a pre-trip meeting. And there's a debate, where should we do this? It's going to be a lot of people because we're inviting the wives, we're inviting the children. We're looking at about 150 people. If we do it outdoors in a park, there's a concern that people won't be held together. There won't be any walls holding them together. People might kind of just spread out and not really interact with each other. If you do it indoors, the walls that you have around the room define the space, and you can't wander, you can't stray too far apart from each other. So the walls not only protect from the outside, but they define the space within. I just officiated at a wedding. It was one of my first weddings that I ever officiated at. I did not tell that to the mother of the bride and the groom before the ceremony. I didn't think that would give them a sense of calm about what was about to happen. Someone came up to me after and said, "Rabbi, I'm sure you've been doing this for many, many times." And I said, "Between me and you, this is the first one." But and there's a custom at a traditional Jewish wedding where the bride, first the groom walks down, and he stands under the wedding canopy, under the chuppah, and then the bride walks down. And there's a tradition that she makes a circle. She encircles him 7 times. And the goal of it is not to get her dizzy so that she'll just go into it without having any second thoughts. That's not the purpose. But the purpose is that she's building symbolic walls around her husband to protect their marriage, their new home, which is very delicate at its beginning, from the negative forces on the outside. But it does protect from the outside. It also defines their home, their space within. And that's the significance of a wall, the wall of a city. So back to page 2, number C, letter C. A city wall protects it from dangers without while sheltering the life which flourishes within. And there was a statement that we quoted last week. It was actually source 3, and it's a verse from the Song of Songs which says, "I am a wall." This is the quote from King Solomon, who wrote this beautiful work called Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. He writes, "I am a wall and my breasts are like watchtowers." And the Talmud explains that means I am a wall, it refers to the Torah, and the breasts being like watchtowers are the Torah scholars. And again, the wall over here, the wall upon which the Horman is running across, that refers to the Torah, which protects us from the ideology of Horman. The Torah is in place because the Torah teaches us, it protects us, that the pleasures of the world around us are meant to be enjoyed and utilized correctly. And the Torah prescribes for us how to use it, how to go about using it in the correct way. And the watchtowers, whenever you have a wall, so the wall, the enemies will come and they'll try to break the wall. But when you have watchtowers, you have guards in those towers, and they're going to drop catapult stones on the enemy soldiers that are trying to break the wall. In ancient times, they would pour boiling hot oil on invaders. So they're in watchtowers, and they defend the wall, which in turn is really defending the city. So the watchtowers are where the defenders of the city stand to protect the wall and the city. The Torah scholars who acquire the Torah's wisdom and transmit it to the nation, they are thereby sustaining its existence. And they nurture the nation. Here we go. The idea that it says that the breasts that are like the watchtowers of the city, they nurture the nation the same way a baby is nurtured by its mother's milk. That's the significance of this wall and the watchtowers. It refers to the Torah scholars and to the Torah itself, which protects from the ideology of Horman. It teaches us how to use worldly pleasures correctly.
But sometimes the Berlin Wall, for example, is not this type of wall.
Correct. Meaning you have a wall which is just to divide. Yes.
Yeah.
In more ancient times, when they built a wall around the city, it was kind of to protect the inhabitants of that city. That was the primary function. Agreed. Okay, now, There was a specific city which is being discussed here, which is the city called Mechuzah, city of ancient Babylon. What was the significance of this city? And that brings us to page 3, letter D. The people of Mechuzah, which was a commercial center of ancient Babylonia, they valued Torah scholarship. It was a city of scholars, not only of commerce, but they studied the Torah for the wrong reason. Right? What's the right reason to study the Torah? Because you want to know. You want to have a relationship with God. You want to know what He expects from you. You want to know the history, the stories that are contained, the lessons that are contained within the Torah, how to live your life. That wasn't their goal in studying Torah. They pursued it as a way to gain honor and acclaim. They understood that if they studied the Torah and became scholars, erudite in the study of Torah, people will respect them, people will give them honor. They sought to advance their own glory, not to extol the glory of God. And this kind of Torah study offers no protection against the enticements of Horman. It won't help. Thus, Horman was quite comfortable running across the wall of Mechuzah, using even Torah scholarship to search for total gratification. Which means like this. In this story, Horman is running across the wall of the city Mechuzah. Normally, a wall represents the Torah, which offers protection against Horman, because the Torah protects us in using the physical world correctly. But when you're studying the Torah for the wrong reason, you're doing it really just to gratify yourself in your own pursuit of honor and respect, does that kind of Torah study protect you from Horman? Unfortunately not. And Mechuzah was a city that even though they were involved in Torah study, it was for the wrong reason. And hence Horman could just run across that wall, he could sprint across that wall very comfortably, because that wall in no way opposed him. That kind of wall did not oppose him. Now, we had down below, there was a cavalryman. A cavalry means people that ride on animals. And this person was running along, trying to keep up with Horman, but was unable to do so. What does that represent? And you can take a look at letter E. What that represents was a true Torah scholar. And just as somebody riding in the cavalry will use the animal, the beast upon which they sit, to help them in their endeavor of riding, of covering ground, the Torah scholar as well uses his body correctly. He uses it really just to pursue his lofty goals in life. I'll give you an example. So I had a study partner when I lived in Israel and I was studying in the Talmudic Academy. I had a study partner for 5 years that we studied Talmud together. And this study partner was no one other than my wife's oldest brother. Brilliant, brilliant man. Literally a genius by every definition. And I was fortunate to be able to study with him for about 5 years. And one day, I just wasn't feeling it. Sometimes if your heart is into your learning, if you're inspired, you could accomplish in a short while what it would take you to do. If you're uninspired, it might take you a few hours, but when you're in the zone, you could do it. You could accomplish great things in short time. I just wasn't feeling it one day. And I said, you know what? Give me a little break. I'm going to go out, get some fresh air. And I go to the store, and I buy chocolate. Chocolate perhaps is the cure of all evils. That is a definite possibility. And I get a bar of chocolate, I sit down, I eat the chocolate, I enjoy some fresh, crisp Jerusalem air. I come back in and I feel much better. I'm able to resume my studies. And I say to my brother-in-law, look how small I am. Look how small people are. A little bit of chocolate. That's what stood between me and success, was a little bit of chocolate. And he said, you're looking at it wrong. He said, look how big people are, that they realize that what they need to move on and to succeed is a little bit of chocolate, right? It's a question of how do you realize, what you need to indulge in order to continue to succeed. So that is that's that story, which kind of brings out this idea that the cavalryman who's riding along the wall below, he's utilizing his body, his more mundane and materialistic needs in order to pursue his lofty goals. But it says in the story, he's trying to keep up with Horman, but he can't. He's unable to keep up. Horman is racing along, and he's kind of straggling behind. And the reason for that is that the one below has a struggle. He's constantly living with a struggle do the right thing, do the wrong thing, and when you're struggling, you can't go as fast as somebody who just runs with the wrong thing. There's no way that you can keep up with him. We're going to see who finishes in the end, though. It's like, the story of the tortoise and the hare, where perhaps the hare is bolting, early on in the race, but it could be the tortoise who goes slow because he's struggling, will eventually come out on top. Now, letter F, pouring of the wine. What does that mean? He's pouring wine from cup to cup. He's juggling back and forth. What is going on there? And here is the incredible thing. This is one of my favorite parts of the entire story. An incredible lesson. Wine was often used in the olden days. At the beginning of a meal, before you even started to eat, you would drink a glass of wine. And the reason why they drank wine was to stimulate the appetite. Once you drank wine, you would feel even a greater desire to eat. So, just as wine stimulates a person's appetite, there are two main drives that motivate a person. One of those drives is a pursuit of the sensory, the sensual pleasures in life. Food, sex, those are two main drives that a person has that are completely sensual. And that's represented by one cup of wine, because just as the wine motivates a person to eat, it stimulates your appetite, so too that is one aspect of the human drive. But there's another, which is the pursuit of honor, grandeur, fame, right? You want to be respected. That's not a sensual drive, but it's a very deep motivational factor that people have. We want honor, we want respect. And that is the other glass of wine. These are the two indulgences that people can be involved in. And the way it works is that once one of them is full, once one of those cups of wine is full, you've eaten, you've fulfilled every pleasure you have. Well, now you're going to kind of pour the wine into the other cup, and you're going to start to embark upon the pursuit of honor, of glory, and fame. Let's read that together. Letter F. Man's pursuit of physical pleasure contains two elements: sensory pleasure and that of the ego, a pursuit of honor. Both of these drives will stimulate a person to act, just as wine stimulates one's appetite. Once one cup is full, once he has attained a full measure of sensory pleasure, he will pour the wine into the other cup, and he will look to secure honor and glory. And that is what's symbolized by, again, this hormone is the epitome of hedonism, materialism, pleasure in this world, self-aggrandizement. And that's the pouring of the wine. Once one cup is full, it's time to try to fill the other. Now, it says that he was able to pour the wine, and he didn't spill even a drop on the earth. And what that symbolizes is the following. There were times where he was not that great of a juggler, and he did spill a little bit of wine. And that means there were times in his life where he was plagued by feelings of conscience. And he asked himself, am I living a meaningful life? What is going on with my life? Am I doing anything constructive or meaningful? And that would mar his pleasure. Those questions, those pangs of conscience would mar his pleasure in life. That's when some of the wine, some of the pleasure would spill to the ground and be lost and be ruined. But finally he became an expert juggler. He learned how to vanquish those feelings, those pangs of conscience. It's fascinating. Hitler, his name be obliterated, he wrote a book called Mein Kampf. And in that book he writes how conscience needs to be subdued. We can't let that get in the way of things. And that is what Horman learned to do. He learned to stifle his conscience and not let it affect him in any way whatsoever. Letter G, that is. There were times when Horman could not pour the wine perfectly without spilling. There were times when his conscience would nag at him, asking if there was more to life than hedonistic pleasures. He would think of the time when the body that he so worshipped will be placed forever into the ground. That's always used as a way of bringing a person to realize what's important in life, is whenever you think about the time when you'll no longer be alive. It says that in the Ethics. It says, think of the following and you won't sin. Think of the fact that eventually you're going to end up like all humans end up. And that will give you a deeper meaning in life. And he thought of that. And he's thinking about the time that his soul is going to stand in judgment before his Creator. And these thoughts would diminish his pleasure. But finally, he learned how to fight against these troubling thoughts, successfully burying them. And now he's able to pour the wine and he doesn't spill any. Now, if you remember, he's standing on 2 mules. There were 2 mules that he was standing on. What's the significance of a mule? A mule is a crossbreed between a horse and a donkey. And it's a sterile animal. It's an animal that's never really able to have a child, a baby. It can't have a baby. But yet it gives the appearance of being very strong, very sturdy, very permanent. It looks permanent. But it has no real sense of permanence because as soon as it passes, there can never be a colt, a baby mule, to replace it. And the same is true with indulging in worldly pleasures. They were never meant to be an end in and of themselves. They're here really just to get us to do things that we need to do. Think, for example, of the two greatest sensual pleasures that humans have. The drive for food. Well, we kind of need to eat if we're going to survive ourselves. And therefore, in order to make sure that we do the things that we need to do to sustain ourselves, God made it very pleasurable to eat. He gave us wonderful shawarma with great rice and beautiful colors in the salad and fruit that has every shade in the rainbow. He made it very pleasurable because he wants us to sustain ourselves. Not that the pleasure is the end goal. It's to make sure that we stay healthy and have the energy to carry on in our day and do the things that are important. The sexual drive in man. If that wouldn't exist, there would be no next generation, right? The Talmud actually says something fascinating. It says that the great sages in Talmudic times, they kind of convened a council and they said, man is straying after idolatry. If you read through the books of the Tanakh, there were so many Jews who fell prey to the sin of idolatry, and we don't really relate to that so much anymore. Like, when was the last time any of us ever had a strong desire to go and worship a little statue of Buddha? Never, right? We don't relate to that. Like, we don't really have to be like, what were they doing, right? And I say to you, we'll try to explain to somebody who would have no sexual drive what we're doing, right? If you don't have it, you can't understand it. And the reason why we don't understand the desire for idolatry is because the sages convened this council and they somehow abolished the desire for idolatry. They tried to do the same thing with man's sexual drive, but then the chickens weren't laying eggs. No one was having babies. And they said, this is not going to work. So again, it's not an end goal, but God created this desire within us in order to ensure that humanity would have a continuity, that will continue. There'll be a next generation. So to take it as a goal in and of itself will just lead to destruction. When people seek pleasure, and that's all they want, that will lead to pleasures that are more illicit in nature. Well, if it feels good to smoke marijuana, imagine how much greater it must feel to take something a little bit stronger. The sexual drive will lead a person, if it's used incorrectly, it could destroy marriages, it could wreck things. If you take it as a goal of itself, it's like a mule, it's sterile. It makes you think that you'll feel good, but you won't. Yes?
Can we include when you eat too much food?
Yeah, if you overeat, that's it's
Health problems?
Sure. Sometimes the food tastes good. Are we using the taste, incorrectly? 100%. Overeating is Maimonides actually wrote like a section of his law about how to stay healthy, and there he speaks very negatively about overeating. It's not considered a healthy thing. With my wife's cooking, it's not always the easiest thing to avoid overeating, but sometimes it takes strong effort. Let's just read this letter together. Letter H. Pleasure was never meant to be an end unto itself, but rather a reminder to do the things which are necessary to sustain ourselves. Pleasure as an end goal is sterile, just like a mule is sterile. Instead of joy, it will bring only emptiness. To fill this emptiness, new stimuli must be sought. Drugs, alcohol, even bestiality. Eventually we become numb to the stimulation, and a new mule, which means a new goal, must be sought. That of ego and satisfaction. That's represented by the second mule. But this goal is also sterile, meaning when a person looks for ego, self-aggrandizement, your honor, right, my respect, isn't that something which rips relationships apart? You feel slighted because you have a desire for respect. And that's why somebody's able to insult you. If you didn't have that strong need, you wouldn't be as easily insultable, and then perhaps families would often stay together more than they do. Mules appear strong and sturdy, the epitome of permanence, but that's an illusion. There can never be a colt to replace it when it is gone. Okay, we're just about finished this story. Just 2 more points. If you remember, the mules were standing on 2 sides of a river called the river Donag. Now, Donag is actually Aramaic for wax. Aramaic for wax. And what this is explaining is, well, if all of these pleasures, all of these pursuits never really bring happiness, and we kind of understand that. We understand when we indulge ourselves, will it really make you happy? You eat the chocolate cake and you thought you were going to feel so much better afterward, but you don't always, right? Now, why do we do it? Why do we do it? And the answer is the power of fantasy. We fantasize, wow, that will just make me feel great. That's really the power of Hollywood, is that for that moment we're able to escape into a new reality, into a reality of fantasy, and we're able to escape where we are, and we feel like we're somewhere wonderful. But when the lights come back on, and the screen no longer has the images on it, we're back to where we started, feeling perhaps just as empty as we did before. That's wax. Wax looks very solid and strong, but as soon as the light of truth, it gets heated up, it starts to melt away, and you kind of see there's nothing really to it. And finally, the king's day. He speaks of a day when things descend to the depths and there are other things that rise up to the heavens. That refers to the day of death. When Horman finally perfects his juggling act perfectly, he's able to indulge in every aspect of human indulgence, that of ego, that of the sensual pleasures. God realizes he's not going to ever complete the task for which he was placed in this world. And that's when he sends the king's messengers, which means the angel of death, to call the soul back to heaven, and the body descends to the depth. So here was a story that you read it, it seems obscure, it seems strange, but there is so much depth contained in this story, so many fundamental Jewish ideas. Okay, let's move on. We're on page 4, source 5. Here's a lighter story in the Talmud, but there's what to learn from here as well. The Talmud tells us that one day, a great sage by the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that ch sound is not an easy sound to do. I was once in New York, and I was in a Brooks Brothers store, and there was a non-Jewish salesman behind the counter, and he said to me, "What's your name?" Now, my name is Chaim, but the ch just never goes over easy. So the way you spell Chaim is C-H-A-I-M. And if you were to read it phonetically, you could say Chaim. So I say, "Oh, my name is Chaim." He says, "That's really Chaim, isn't it?" You know? That's New York for you, right? So this sage named Rabbi Yochanan was swimming in the Jordan River. The Jordan River is a beautiful river that's on the east coast of Israel. And he's there bathing in the cool water, and another sage by the name of Reish Lakish. Now, Reish Lakish was not always a sage. He actually had a history. He was the head of a ring of bandits. He was a highwayman, a brigand. And Reish Lakish, sees Rabbi Yochanan bathing in the river and says, "That's victim number 27 coming up." And he saw him, and he jumped into the Jordan River after him. Now, when he jumped, it was an extraordinary jump. It was like a triple flip that would have got him at least, a 4.8 in the Olympics for that kind of jump. Rabbi Yochanan sees the jump. He says, "Wow!" Rabbi Yochanan says to him, "You should use your strength for Torah." He sees this brigand jumping into the water in this incredible manner. He says, "Use your strength for Torah," which actually there are certain rabbis who sign off their letters with this phrase, "Chelech lioraisa," use your strength to endeavor in the study of Torah. Reish Lakish sees Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was a very, very handsome man. He was often quoted in the Talmud as one of the best-looking men to ever have lived. And Reish Lakish sees him and says, "Wow, you should use your beauty for women." Again, Rabbi Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, "Use your strength for Torah." He says to Rabbi Yochanan, "Use your beauty for women." Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "If you repent your ways," I know you're a bandit, "if you change your ways, and you adopt a lifestyle which is perhaps a little more pious than being a highway bandit, then I'll tell you what, I have a sister who's even more beautiful than myself. She is all my friends want to come over to the house. They always ask to be invited over. I will put in a good word on your behalf. Actually, fascinatingly, the person who set me up with my wife is actually her brother. Her brother was the one who set us up, and this is what's happening right here, where Rabbi Yochanan says, I will put in a good word with my sister, which is exactly what my brother-in-law did. He put in a good word on my behalf, so therefore I was the lucky recipient. I'll put in a good word, and she's even more beautiful than I am. Rish Lakish Herdai, so that's a pretty good deal. And he accepted this upon himself. He accepted that he's going to start studying some Torah, become a more pious individual. I just tried to imagine Rabbi Yochanan selling this to his father, So his father says to him, so Yochanan, who did you bring home for your sister? Well, he's a bandit, but he committed to change, It must have been a hard sell. Most fathers stand there with a shotgun, if any young men try to come after their daughters. This is a ex-bandit. But there was potential there, and I guess Rabbi Yochanan saw that potential. And he says, you're going to make a very good brother-in-law someday. And then it continues, after Reish Lakish accepted upon himself to study Torah, he wanted to retrieve his clothes, he wanted to jump out of the water, but his strength was no longer there in his full capacity, and he was unable to muster the strength to jump out of the water. And it goes on to say that Rabbi Yochanan taught him scripture, which means the verses of Tanakh, he taught him Mishnah, and Reish Lakish became a great man, where pretty much you can't go 3 pages of Talmud and studying the Talmud without coming upon some teaching of Reish Lakish, and he became one of the great sages of the Talmud. If you ever needed to get into your house in the middle of the night, if you get locked out, you would know which sage to call, though, who will be able to get you back in. That's the story. Now, yes?
The symbolism of unable to, he wanted to retrieve his clothes, but was unable to.
There's something there, right? Yes.
Or else they wouldn't have had that sentence.
Lorraine, it is, right?
Right.
Spot on it is. So I believe there are 3 lessons that can be learned and derived from this story. I'm going to start with Lorraine's. It says he tried to leave the water the same way he came in, but he was unable. He tried to muster the strength, but the strength was not there. And our sages tell us that there are 2 polar ends. One of those ends is spiritual, and the other one is the more physical. The more that a person indulges in the physical, the less strength they'll have for the spiritual. However, the stronger a person becomes in the spiritual, it says that studying Torah in some way depletes a person's physical strength, because there is this seesaw between the physical and the spiritual, the mundane and the holy. And once Reish Lakish accepted upon himself a more spiritual lifestyle, he no longer had that vigor and that strength that he once had. And hence he was unable, even with just the acceptance to live a spiritual lifestyle, he was no longer able to get out the way that he went in. I think that a second powerful lesson, which is incredible, is that Reish Lakish couldn't have been the chief bandit and have been 15 years old. He was already an established person, perhaps in his 20s, perhaps in his 30s. But he was not a teenager. He already had an established course of life. He had a career. He made good money. And he was able to change himself around midlife, which is such an incredibly difficult thing to do. One of the great sages that we so admire was a man named Rabbi Akiva. Had the same quality. At the age of 40, Rabbi Akiva, he wasn't rabbi at the time, he was just plain old Akiva, he couldn't tell the difference between the letter Aleph and the letter Bet. He didn't know the difference. Interesting side point, by the way, the word alphabet comes from the words Aleph, Bet. And the reason for that is that the first alphabet ever discovered, and historians around the world will corroborate this fact, the first alphabet ever discovered was the Hebrew alphabet. Wow. And when you speak about, Jewish contributions to the world, before they had the alphabet, it was very difficult to write down information. So when you had one generation that achieved a certain level of scholarship or erudition, there was no way for them to transmit it to the next generation, because when the people who had that knowledge died, the knowledge would die with them. But with the advancement of the alphabet, then you could record it, you could write it down. and the next generation could continue where you left off. And that was a Jewish contribution to the world. Alphabet, Aleph, Bet. But again, that was Rabbi Akiva, who didn't know the difference at the age of 40 between an Aleph and a Bet. And he went on to say, I'm going to change my life around. I'm a simple shepherd who is illiterate. I'm going to start to study. It's never too late to change one's life around. That's another valuable lesson we see from this story. Lesson number 3. Sometimes you want to do the right thing, but you're doing it for the wrong reasons, right? Do you use a motivational agenda, which is not perhaps noble or altruistic? He wanted to marry Rabbi Yochanan's sister because she was beautiful. That's what he wanted. He's going to use that as a motivation to do the right thing. And in fact, our sages say that if you are, if you're doing it, what they say is shalom lishma, for the wrong reasons, but you're doing the right thing, go ahead, keep doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, because eventually you will begin to do it for the correct reasons. And you see that from this story, that he did the right thing for the wrong reason, and it worked out well. He became a person who was in sync with doing it, the right thing, for the right reason. Let's move on. The next story tells of 2 people who suffered tremendous physical discomfort. I'm not going to read the story per se in order. I'll kind of just summarize it for you. And one of these 2 people was a man named Rabbi Elazar, the son of Shimon. His father was the famous sage Shimon bar Yochai. And this Elazar, the son of Shimon, was tasked by the Roman government, who controlled the country at the time, to catch Jewish thieves. If there were any Jewish criminals, they said, listen, you're Jewish, you understand, the Jewish mentality, we need you to be on our police force, and you're going to specialize in the Jewish division in catching Jewish criminals. And he was successful, and he caught Jewish criminals. But he was concerned that perhaps he might have, over his career, caught people that maybe were innocent, that were tried as guilty. And just to make sure that he was atoned for anything that may possibly have been wrong, he said, God, I want you to give me some suffering so I could gain and achieve atonement for anything I may have done wrong. That was one sage who suffered. And the Talmud contrasts that to another sage who suffered terrible physical pain, and that is Rabbi Judah the Prince. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the man who was responsible for the redactment and the writing of the Mishnah, and he's often referred to in the shortened form of just Rabbi, which means our teacher. He was the one who wrote the Mishnah. And he suffered from kidney stones. Now, my father-in-law has a rule, and his rule is if a man ever speaks about, specifically a man, if a man ever speaks about childbirth experiences, he will get in trouble. Because he doesn't know anything about it, and his wife will always say, you think you don't understand anything, right? But they say that even women who understand the pain of childbirth, women can attest to that kidney stones is known as being more painful than childbirth, than labor. Could anyone corroborate that? Has anyone ever here experienced that? That's personal. I'm not going there. But they say that it's incredibly painful, and even like soldiers who are like, tough as nails, give me stitches without any kind of anesthetic. When they get like kidney stones, they will pass out or vomit from the pain. That's how difficult it is.
It's painful, Rabbi.
It's painful.
It's
Okay.
very painful. I don't have it. My whole family get that.
Mm-hmm.
It's very painful.
Wow.
And childbirth, it depends on the person. Some people could have literally no pain, which I really realized for myself.
Mhm.
Some people have tremendous pain.
Wow. Okay, so
It's
each person's different. What a kidney stone is just a buildup of calcium inside of the urinary tract, and that kind of, the person has to really pass it, urinate it through, and that's supposed to be incredibly painful. And Rabbi Judah the Prince suffered from these kidney stones. And whenever he would use the restroom, it would just be screams of agony. He was also, by the way, Rabbi Judah the Prince was an incredibly wealthy individual. And the Talmud tells us that he had such an incredible amount of livestock, of horses and of cattle, that the stable boy, who was in charge of taking care of the animals, would collect all of the manure, which they would use in ancient times as fertilizer for fields. And it's not so ancient. I actually planted for the first time this year a beautiful vegetable garden with 2 raised vegetable beds with 1,600 pounds of soil from the Home Depot. It's a lot of bags of soil. It was 40 pound bags. And they actually sell something called humus manure, as fertilizer, and you put that in, you mix it in with the soil. I had a friend who was a farmer, and he was mixing it with his hands, and I'm like trying to use like the spade, because there's no way I'm going to touch that stuff. But they still use it nowadays. And it was something which was sellable. You were able to sell it. And it says that the stable boy of Rabbi Judah the Prince made so much money from just selling the manure of all the animals, the vast amount of animals that he had, that he became richer. The stable boy became richer than the king of Persia from just selling the droppings of the animals. And it says that whenever Rabbi Judah the Prince would go into the bathroom, again, the screams of agony would be terrible. It was also somewhat embarrassing. It was a bit compromising. And the stable boy would try to feed all of the animals simultaneously to whenever Rabbi Judah the Prince would use the bathroom, in the hope that the excited animals that get in the food, the neighing and the braying of the animals, which made quite a cacophony of noise, would drown out the sounds of Rabbi Judah the Prince. But the Talmud says that it didn't work. Still, Rabbi Judah the Prince's voice would outweigh the animals, and it could still be heard. Now, again, the suffering of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Shimon, he invited that upon himself because he was concerned. Perhaps he one time prosecuted an innocent man and punished that man. And Rabbi Judah the Prince suffered from these kidney stones where the pain was so agonizing, the screams were so loud, that it was greater than the noise the animals made when being fed. And the Talmud goes on to say, why did Rabbi Judah the Prince suffer so much? We understand why Rabbi Elazar, the son of Shimon, he invited that upon himself, but why did Rabbi Judah the Prince suffer so? And it goes on to tell a story. And it says, one time, Rabbi Judah the Prince was walking down the road, and a young lamb that was in the slaughterhouse, about to be slaughtered, escaped from the slaughterhouse, which was right near Rabbi Judah the Prince was walking, and it ran to Rabbi Judah the Prince, and it buried its head in his robes. It was scared. He realized what was about to happen to it in the slaughterhouse, and it was scared. And the Talmud says that it was crying in his robes. I don't know if that's literal or if it was just this extreme fear that the animal had. And Rabbi Judah the Prince said to the animal, "Go, for this purpose you were created." He says to the lamb, "This is your destiny. Your destiny is you're here to serve people. That's what animals are here for, is to help people. And that's what you were created for. Go, for this you were created." And at that point, they said in heaven, he's not showing compassion to the animals. He also is going to suffer. His suffering finally ended by a different episode that happened in his life, where one day his housekeeper was sweeping the floor, and there was a mother weasel with a little litter of baby weasels, and she was going to sweep them out of the house. And Rabbi Judah the Prince tells her, "Stop. It says that God's compassion is upon all of his creations. Let them be. Let them stay." And they said, now in heaven, while he's being compassionate, we are going to alleviate his suffering. And finally, his kidney stones came to an end. That's the story. Now, first of all, what's the Jewish belief on eating animals? We have a slaughterhouse, we kill animals. We do believe that we are allowed to eat animals. They are here. Their purpose is to serve us. Perhaps one of the greatest things they could ever be used for is to adorn someone's Shabbat table or holiday. That's what it's here for. Rabbi Judah the Prince was not wrong in what he said. The information was correct. What then was the complaint that they had against him in heaven? And I think the complaint was, it's true that this is the purpose of the animal, but at the same time, you can feel some compassion, you can feel some empathy, you can empathize with that animal. It's scared. And instead of coldly saying to it, "This is what you were created for," you can feel something for it. And that was missing. And that's the complaint they had. Even, humans are capable of so many emotions. You could feel happiness and sadness at the same time. Imagine you walk your child down to the wedding canopy, to the chuppah, and they're about to get married. And you feel elated, you feel really happy. And at the same time, they're not going to be living at home anymore. They're moving to a different state with their new wife. You're happy and you're sad. So Rabbi Judah the Prince, at the same time that he realizes that this is the purpose that the animal was created for, he's capable of feeling sympathy, and in heaven they felt that was lacking. One of my wife's favorite Passover ideas. In the Passover Haggadah, it speaks of the 4 sons. And one of those sons is the wicked son, the Rasha, the wicked son. And he asks a question, a scoffing question, like, "What is all this over here that you guys do?" And in the Haggadah, it says something very cryptic. It says that, your response to this wicked son is you hit him in the teeth, in the mouth. Now, that doesn't sound like a very good parenting method. Hit him in the mouth. That's like child abuse. So, well, what does that mean? And it's perhaps not meant to be taken literal. But what it means is that whenever you hit somebody, if you ever hit somebody in the jaw, studies will tell you it's not a safe place to hit somebody because you're very likely to break your wrist. You're going to hurt your hand. Even if you don't break your wrist, it will hurt. It'll hurt. And that's the symbolism here, is that it doesn't mean hit him in the mouth, punch him in the face. It doesn't mean that. It means you're meant to scold. You're meant to punish. You're meant to discipline the child. But when you discipline your child, it should hurt you a little bit too. The child is suffering from being disciplined. Of course, it's the correct thing to do. You don't want to raise a spoiled child who never learns what discipline means. But when you have to punish your child, it's meant to hurt you a little bit as well. That's what it means. When you hit somebody in the mouth, it hurts you too. I remember my 4-year-old. I have a 4-year-old who's a very cute kid. He's a bundle of energy, and he's got a lot going on. So one day I give him a few coins. It's like maybe 5 nickels, which is 25 cents. And he says, "What could I buy for 25 cents?" Well, nowadays not so much. But I tell him there's a supermarket. They sell gumballs. We'll go get you a gumball in the supermarket. So we're going. He's sitting in the back seat of my car, and he opens the car door while the car is moving. Now that's dangerous. That's very dangerous. And I need to teach him very clearly, you can't do that. And I tell him, listen, I'm sorry, I'll have to punish you. You did this very dangerous. You can never do that again. I yelled at him, I raised my voice because I want him to learn this is a dangerous thing. Your punishment is we're not going to get that gumball. So it's meant to, he was crying, he was very upset, and it hurt me a little bit, But you have to teach him discipline. But at the same time, if you're not feeling sympathy for the child, even though Judah the prince was right in telling the lamb, this is the purpose for which you were created, at the same time he was meant to feel some sympathy. Let's move on.
So, did you feel sympathy for your child?
I did. I felt bad. He was very upset.
But you didn't go to the market.
I did not take him there because he needed to be punished. He needed to learn.
Good.
And that's the discipline. But did I feel a little bit bad about it? I wish he could have gotten the gumball because I think he lost the coins before he can go buy the gumball. The kids are not good at holding on to coins. That's.
I bet he didn't do it again.
He did not do it again.
Yeah.
And he probably never will. He learned the lesson, which is important. In one of the parenting classes that my wife went to, the teacher said if your child ever runs into the street, you need to make sure that they will never do it again. And you're going to, that's the time where you will scream at them to the point where they cry. And that's, could you imagine you're driving by and you see a parent yelling at the child, like in the face, like, what are you doing? And you think this is like a terrible parent, right? But on the other hand, you need to really make sure that this becomes ingrained in them. This is not safe. And you're doing it because you love the child and you care about the child. And you're going to get in their face and you're going to yell at them until they cry because you want to make sure it won't happen again, right? Okay, let's skip a bit. Page 5, source 8. This is a fascinating idea. And perhaps we will end with this one. The Talmud here, page 5, source 8, teaches us that until the times of Abraham, human beings did not age. Their bodies did not age with their years. My guess is that the way it worked was they were born, and a person would mature and develop, and they would grow. And then somewhere between the age of 30 and 50, they would kind of max out, and they would remain in that physical condition for the rest of their lives until the day they died. People did not age. Physical signs on their body did not appear. Doesn't that sound awesome? That just sounds great. But here's the problem. Abraham looked exactly like Isaac. They were identical. And the reason why Isaac looked so similar to Abraham was because, if you remember the story, Sarah and Abraham were barren. They had no children for many, many years. One day, Sarah gets abducted by the king of the Philistines, Avimelech. And about a year later, she gives birth to a baby. What are people going to say? They're going to say she was married to Abraham for so many years. She never got pregnant. She never conceived. All of a sudden, one night she spends in the palace of Avimelech, and she gets pregnant. Who do you think the father of that child really is? And this is what people were saying. People were talking. This is what the tabloids, the Star, and the Insider, this is what it said on the front page. And therefore, God made it that Isaac was a spitting image of Abraham. There was no doubt as to who the father was. But because they looked so similar, and Abraham wasn't aging, the Talmud says people would want to speak to Abraham, and they would erroneously go over to Isaac and strike up a conversation, and vice versa. And perhaps even more so, this is an important idea. With age comes life experience. My wife's grandmother, she gave us parenting advice that was so valuable because she went through it herself so many times. And we need to show respect for people that have lived more years than ourselves. But if you and I look the same age, I won't know when I meet you that you have 30 or 40 more years of life experience than I do, and I won't be able to accord you the proper respect. And therefore it's important that even though it's difficult because we're perhaps not as physically able and capable as when we were younger, but it's important that our bodies show the fact that we have this life experience. And therefore it was in the times of Abraham when God changed the human body and it began to age as people became of more progressed years. Let's read that together. Source 8. Until the time of Abraham, there were no physical signs of old age. Whoever wanted to speak with Abraham, though, might talk with Isaac by mistake. Whoever wanted to speak to Isaac might speak to Abraham. And Abraham came and he beseeched God for mercy. And from then on, physical indications of old age came into being. As it says in the verse, now Abraham was old, well on in years, which implies that his body showed his age, and that was the first time that ever happened. The next idea taught in this same very passage in the Talmud tells us that until the times of Jacob, the way a person's life would end would always be very sudden. There would be no illness. Right? The way normally a person dies nowadays is close to the end of their life. Hopefully it's short and not prolonged, but a person becomes ill and then they pass. Until Jacob came around, that was not the case. A person would be living, they would hit the age of 90, 100, whatever it was, and they would suddenly die. And Jacob prayed to God that that should change. You know why? Because dying a sudden death, even though it seems nice, you don't have a chance to say goodbye. You don't have a chance to set your affairs in order, to contemplate the life that you lived and prepare for your entry into the next world. And Jacob realized how important that is to have a little bit of time, to see it coming, to have that knowledge. So I always, my prayer is that for me it shouldn't be prolonged, it should be short, but I don't want to die a sudden death. I don't want to go to sleep and not wake up the next morning. I don't want to die in a car crash. I want to know that it's coming. And that was the prayer of Jacob. And let's read that together. Until the time of Jacob, there was no feebleness that preceded death. Jacob came and beseeched God for mercy, and from then on, feebleness came into being. As it says, and he said to Joseph, behold, your father is ill. This is Jacob as he's lying on his deathbed. Somebody came and told Joseph, who was the ruler of Egypt in the capital city, go to your father who's in the land of Goshen because his end is imminent. He's lying on his deathbed. That was perhaps the first time that anyone ever lived on their deathbed. So these are some interesting stories from the Talmud, which I hope their lessons found meaning with you. Have a wonderful day.